So happy to debate this bill here tonight. I'm a member of the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs, so I'm very familiar with this legislation. It is important legislation. It is necessary legislation, and it's legislation that, of course, I'm proud to stand here and support. One of the things that often gets lost in this debate, and I've heard this over and over again at committee, is the misunderstanding of what this legislation actually is designed and supposed to do. We often hear from members who, on the opposite side of the House here, say, well, the bill doesn't do this. Well, the bill doesn't do that. Well, no, that's not. It's not designed to be the panacea for everything. It's not designed to solve every single solution. It's designed to solve one specific issue that was raised by the expert panel, and that is the need for regulations to set safe drinking water standards. Now, they recommended other things as well, but that was one of the key things that they said needed to be moved forward with. And that's why this legislation here is so important, because what it does is going to give the authority to enact regulations to make sure that we have standards consistent to allow for safe drinking water. And of course, safe drinking water is important. We know that. It's a huge issue. The issues that we have with First Nation communities are varied and many. We have geographical challenges. We have different circumstances. It's complex. We have to find ways to filter water, remove contaminants. We have to find ways to deal with wastewater. And Mr. Speaker, a lot of these issues are faced by communities across Canada, non-Aboriginal communities. And what's the #1 tool that they're going to use to make sure that they have safe drinking water? It's a system of regulation that's designed to make sure that water that is treated is up to certain standards. And that is why this legislation is so important, because right now there are no standards. There's no legally enforceable standards to regulate both water and wastewater on most First Nation communities. Now, there are, of course, some self-governing First Nations that do, and they've established and enforced water quality regimes, but they are the exception and not the rule. Bill S-8 is going to help, turn that exception into the rule. Now, what we're going to do with once this legislation is passed, and I've seen people come to the committee and say, well, the legislation says it could do this, it could do that, it might transfer some liability to First Nations. And I remind people that say that, that's because this is enabling legislation. The legislation doesn't say it shall do this or it shall do that. What it says is, these are a list of things that may end up being regulated. It's giving the authority to engage in a comprehensive discussion with First Nation communities with respect to what particular regulations need to be in place to suit each particular community. And that's why it's important. We always have to remember that this is enabling legislation. But Mr. Speaker, we do know that we have a strategy on safe drinking water, and there's 3 pillars. Continue investments in water and wastewater infrastructure, developing enforceable standards and protocols, and enhancing capacity building and operator training. And of course, we just heard the member from, I believe it's Winnipeg North, ask a question about capacity. And of course, we have invested a significant amount in capacity through both the Circuit Rider Training Program, which is a fantastic program that is making big differences. What I can tell you is this: when we talk about some of the issues surrounding capacity, we can tell you that 7 years ago, only a small minority of First Nations had water systems that had trained and certified operators. Very few. Now, the progress is clear. By 2011, the national assessment found that operators with the appropriate level of certification managed 51% of First Nation water systems and 42% of First Nations wastewater systems. So we've gone from a few to 51% and 42%. That is a significant increase. A year later, annual performance inspections of the same systems had determined that these percentages had increased to 60.1 and 53.9. Yes, it's not 100%, Mr. Speaker. We want it to be at 100%, but we're getting there. Properly trained operators will ensure that the systems comply with regulations and consistently produce clean and reliable drinking water. So we're looking at all of these things. These things don't operate in a vacuum. We have to have the regulations. That was raised by the expert panel. We have to have skilled operators. We're making those investments. We also have to have investments in the infrastructure that's necessary to produce the safe water, the drinking water, and the wastewater. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we've invested close to $3 billion. That's a big number. I have to say it again. I mean, it's billion, $3 billion in wastewater and drinking water systems since 2006. Those investments are making a real difference. But when you also look at it, Mr. Speaker, not only are we just making those investments, we're making the right investments. And why are we doing that? Because we went forward with the most comprehensive review in the history of this country to look at water and wastewater systems. It's a review that wasn't done. It wasn't done by the previous government. They didn't do that. We did that, and we figured out, we wanted to know which systems needed to have those investments. Systems were rated as high risk, medium risk, low risk. Therefore, we can prioritize where the investments need to be. Look at the high-risk ones. Let's work on those first. So we look at this as a multifaceted approach, one that's going to make a significant difference. When we look at the regulations, we want time to do that. We're saying we're going to take time. We're going to, develop these in consultation with First Nations to make sure that we have the right regulations, to make sure we have safe drinking water and properly treated wastewater. Now, I know some people have said, well, wait a minute, where's the money? You can't impose these regulations without money. Well, I say, how do you build a house when you don't know what the designs are? You don't just go up and say, I want a house, here's the money. You actually have to design the house. And that's what the regulations do. They're designing. They're saying, these are the regulations that need to be in place. Once you know what those regulations are, then you figure out what's it going to cost to implement those regulations. And that's exactly the process we're following. We're going to develop the regulations in consultation with First Nations, and then we're going to figure out what, if any, funding arrangements need to change. 7 years ago, the Government of Canada and the Assembly of First Nations agreed to work together on drinking water. Mr. Speaker, today, this House has the opportunity to support this collaboration by endorsing Bill S-8. Surely residents of First Nation communities have waited long enough to have these regulations brought forward and put in place. We want to move forward with this, Mr. Speaker, and I'm hoping that we're going to have the support of all parties in this House to make sure that we can move forward with regulations that are going to help bring safe drinking water and wastewater to First Nations communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.